She represents two women who will be testifying against Harvey Weinstein. Gloria Allred joins us now from our New York studio to talk about this case and its wider implications. Ms. Allred, thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You've been at the center of so many legal fights for women's rights for 4 decades. 2 years ago, this story exploded. One of the most powerful men in Hollywood has now been accused by over 80 women. And we didn't know then what we know now, that criminal charges would come and that he would have to face his accusers in court. What does this moment mean for you?
Well, I'm glad that finally Mr. Weinstein is going to have to be accountable in a court of law. He is going to confront his accusers. I represent one of the 2 victims for whom charges have been filed in this criminal case now pending in New York. My client's name is Mimi. In addition, I represent Annabella Schor, and she is going to be a witness on the issue of sexually predatory conduct if Mr. Weinstein is convicted of the charge to which Ms. Schor will testify, and in addition, the charge in reference to either one of the 2 victims in the case, he could be sentenced to life in prison. So this is high stakes for Mr. Weinstein, and it's high stakes for witnesses too, because you know the jury's going to be looking at them and going to be listening and judging their credibility. And I think that the persons that I represent are extremely brave. They're very courageous to be willing to take the witness stand, to testify under oath, and to be subjected to a very vigorous cross-examination by the defense.
You mentioned your client and the witness that you're also representing, their bravery. What do you think they will be subjected to through the course of this trial?
Well, I think that the defense will do everything possible to attempt to attack their credibility, to point out what the defense will say are inconsistencies, even if they are minor inconsistencies. And you know, when you're telling the truth, and you've told it a number of times, sometimes there are minor inconsistencies. So of course, there are no inconsistencies if you're lying and telling the same story every time. But my clients are going to tell what they say is their truth. And that's why I say they're so brave. But they're going to do it, and it's going to be for the jury to decide. But this case does not only depend on testimony of witnesses. You know, there will be other admissions of emails, there'll be other documentation, there'll be other witnesses. So, well, there are also going to be what we call Molyneux witnesses, or prior bad act witnesses. In other words, 3 other women who are going to, because the court has permitted the prosecution to call them, they're going to be able to testify, and they're going to be testifying about what they allege are same or similar acts by Mr. Weinstein, as will be testified to by the alleged victims. In other words, to show a pattern of conduct, same or similar conduct. And that's what the jury will hear. That took place also in the famous Bill Cosby case. I represented the majority of what they called prior bad act witnesses who testified there. And some of the jurors afterwards, after they convicted Mr. Cosby and sent him to prison, which is where he is today, classified as a violent sexual predator, some of the jurors said that the testimony of these other prior bad act witnesses was very important to them, because they saw that Mr. Cosby had a pattern of doing what he was alleged to have done, and that he would know that women did not consent because he had a pattern of doing this, drugging and sexually assaulting women. So in any event, with Harvey Weinstein, this is a very serious case. And yesterday, of course, the LA County District Attorney filed 2 felony charges on behalf of 2 alleged victims in Los Angeles. And I expect to be representing some potential witnesses in that case. And so even though they were filed yesterday, that trial probably will not take place until sometime after this trial concludes. And then we'll see what happens there.
Ms. Allred, allow me to jump in.
Those are also serious felony charges.
Well, absolutely,
yes,
and we'll certainly be following what's happening in Los Angeles as well. But sticking with what's happening in Manhattan at this point, do you anticipate hearing from Harvey Weinstein? Will he take the stand?
Well, I would say there's 99.9% probability that he will not want to testify under oath and be subjected to cross-examination by the prosecutor. Most attorneys who would represent the accused, the defendants in a case, advise their clients not to testify. And of course, they have what we call a privilege against self-incrimination. They cannot be compelled to testify. And so most don't. Occasionally somebody does, and often they regret it. Of course, it's up to Mr. Weinstein as to whether or not he wants to testify. It's not up to his attorneys. His attorneys can say, don't take the witness stand. He can say, but I want to and I insist I'm going to. And so he can go against the advice of his attorneys. Don't think he will, but maybe he will want to. And then he'll bear the consequences of whatever decision he makes.
Do you think it's possible for him to get a fair trial, considering how high profile this case is?
Well, of course, his attorneys argued today when I was in the courtroom that because yesterday the LA charges were announced at a press conference and that they were front page news in all 3 New York newspapers, and there were hundreds of hits about it on the internet, that somehow now they're picking the jury, or juries filling out questionnaires today, and that somehow that prejudices the rights of Mr. Weinstein, that the argument is he can't get a fair trial, he can't get fair and impartial jurors because everyone will have heard about it. The judge heard that and said, look, the fact that somebody may be arrested doesn't mean that he's guilty. It just means that he was arrested. If you want me to put a question out on the jury questionnaire or give an instruction to the jurors about that, you tell me what it is you would like to add or ask. And so I think, at least at this time, they do have the opportunity, after the questionnaires are filled out, also to question potential jurors and find out if they can be fair and impartial. And if not, then they can possibly excuse those persons from the jury.
Let's talk.
And not allow them to be seated as members of the jury, to be more accurate. So I think the argument, oh, he's prejudiced, you can't get a fair trial, let's delay it, that argument was not bought by the judge. The judge wants to move this case forward. It's already been continued for months once. It was supposed to start in September. Now it's starting. And, I think the judge wants it to keep moving. And I think it's in the interest of the victims, or the persons who allege they are victims, to move it forward. As I said, let's get it done.
Okay, well, speaking of the interests of the victims, there's been quite a bit of criticism in the last couple of years around the issue of non-disclosure agreements. And I know you feel strongly about this. You've written about this in the LA Times. But many people feel, including other victims, that when victims and survivors sign these agreements, it makes it more difficult for others to come forward, and it allows the predator to get away with certain actions. But you've stood by these options for your clients. Why is that?
Well, first of all, it's a choice, a voluntary choice by a person who is a victim to enter into a confidential settlement and not have to be subject to public scrutiny and have the public know that she's been sexually assaulted or raped, and that she's been able to receive a settlement, perhaps of hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions, with the person who they accuse of sexually preying on them. But beyond that, even if they sign a confidential settlement, and this is an important point, they can still go to the police. They can still file a police report. They can still ask that the case be prosecuted. They can still testify at a public trial about what that person did to them. So anyone who did sign such an agreement in reference to Harvey Weinstein or any other person cannot be prohibited from going to the police. As it turns out, apparently nobody did go to the police. But that's the choice of the person who alleges she's the victim. It is not and cannot, as a matter of law, be prohibited from by a confidential settlement. She always has that right. She can also testify in a civil case that can be brought by someone else. So it's a false narrative to say that somehow confidential settlements mean that the predator can keep on preying on people. It's up to the person. If they want their right to privacy, I'm going to defend their right to have a private, confidential settlement.
Ms. Allred, we are running out of time, but I do want to ask you this. You mentioned that you represented clients in the Cosby trial. Here you are with Harvey Weinstein in New York, and you likely will be in Los Angeles. You are also representing clients in the case against Jeffrey Epstein as well as against R. Kelly. What drives you to take these cases? Why are you so committed to this?
And also, I represent some persons who are accusers of Cuba Gooding Jr. That case is now pending in New York, criminal case. It drives me. I just have a passion for justice. We also won the biggest verdict recorded that we know of in the United States just last month for a victim of sexual harassment against a billionaire. And our client, Mahim Khan, we won a verdict for her, one person, $58,250,000. That's what the jury's verdict was. And we are very proud of Ms. Khan and her fight to win justice, and we waged it with her, and we're very happy we're victorious. The month before, on behalf of another employee who alleged that she was sexually harassed by the same billionaire, Alki David, we won $5 million verdict for her. So now he's up to $63,250,000. And we also filed recently, Mahim Khan filed a police report against Mr. David. So, you know, I'm just glad that women are empowered. They're not going to be silenced. They're not going to live in fear. They're going to take action and assert their rights. They consider what the benefits and risks of all their options are, and they want to move forward. They want justice. That's what this is all about, is truth and justice. And I'm so glad that women are being brave and they're exercising their options to fight back against people that they believe are sexual predators.
Gloria Allred, thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you.
Attorney Gloria Allred joining us from New York City.